I'm Matt McClure.
And I'm Francesca Maxime, and this is Currents. Is defending marriage unconstitutional? We'll have details on a controversial court ruling and what it could mean for you. Need to cool off this summer? You may want to head to the movies. We'll hear about this summer's big hits. And a visit to the place that the Pope calls home for the summer.
Good evening. Thanks so much for joining us. A leading Argentine bishop called it a rejection of God that is absurd. It's a bill facing a vote today in that country's Senate that could legalize gay marriage and give same-sex couples the right to adopt. Yesterday, opponents of that bill protested outside Argentina's Senate in a march organized by Catholic and evangelical churches. One organizer said, quote, "The rights of children to have a father and mother cannot be violated."
All this while new attention is being focused in this country on the legal definition of marriage. Last week, a judge in Massachusetts ruled that the Defense of Marriage Act, or DOMA, which defines marriage as between a man and a woman, is unconstitutional. Massachusetts is one of 5 states that grant same-sex marriages. And for some context and perspective, I spoke by phone yesterday with Richard Barnes, Executive Director of the New York State Catholic Conference. Rick, thank you so much for joining us on Currents today.
Francesca, thanks for having me on the show.
There was a landmark ruling that applies to same-sex marriages in Massachusetts last week. A judge made a decision. Talk to us about what that means and what it means from your perspective as the executive director of the New York Catholic Conference.
Well, sure, Francesca. First of all, the case is in a federal court, so this was a federal district judge ruling on the Federal Defense of Marriage Act, and specifically ruling on the portion of that act that affects federal benefits for individuals and couples. And the judge determined that for same-sex couples in Massachusetts, federal benefits would have to flow. And that is directly flies in the face of the 1996 Defense of Marriage Act. So the judge ruled that those portions of that act that would prohibit the federal benefits are unconstitutional. And in New York, we have a little bit of a different status because we do not license or confer marriage on same-sex couples in this state as they do in Massachusetts. But we do have an administrative order from Governor Patterson's administration that has state agencies recognizing the validity of those out-of-state same-sex marriages. So there could, in fact, be long and short-term implications for New York.
This was seen as a bit of a victory for same-sex marriage advocates. What is the Catholic Church's position on how this affects marriage as the Church understands marriage to be and the Church teaches marriage to be?
Well, Francesca, the Church teaches that the traditional definition of marriage, that is between one man and one woman, has a legitimate governmental interest, serves a governmental interest, and has a legitimate place in society as a basic cornerstone or building block of society, but also for the raising and protection of children who are the most vulnerable among us. And in fact, the United States Catholic Conference of Bishops, through Archbishop Kurtz, has issued a statement that reminds Catholics of that very point, that there is a very legitimate purpose for traditional marriage and one that needs to be preserved.
Throughout the ages, it seems that states have been pretty much allowed to determine for themselves marriage regulations, but that this federal regulation now may be applying to Massachusetts. What do you think the next steps are? Because there clearly could be appeals, and it could be perhaps something that might reach the Supreme Court.
Yes, I think we should anticipate that that will happen. There has been some concern expressed by many of the advocates for traditional marriage that the Obama administration will provide a rather lackluster defense of the federal act. We certainly hope that's not the case, and I think for that reason the case will be watched very closely. But we do expect that it will be appealed up through the Federal Court of Appeals system, and then probably to the Supreme Court.
And what is it that New Yorkers who are Catholics or who believe in what you just described as the traditional sense of marriage, what kinds of things might you encourage them to do if they would like to have their voices heard?
Well, that's a very interesting question, Francesca, because in New York, the New York State Legislature, as you know, last November in the New York State Senate, rejected same-sex marriage, and the people's voice at that moment was in fact heard. And we urge people to continue to remind their lawmakers that this is in fact the will of the people. It's very interesting because now we have a federal court judge in Massachusetts loudly proclaiming that traditional marriage has no rational basis. What he declared was that it was based solely on irrational fear and bigotry, and that runs contrary to New York law. To remind folks, I will read a very brief statement. This came from the New York case, the highest court in New York, in 2006, addressed the issue of same-sex marriage from the New York constitutional standpoint. And I'll just read you. This is out of the opinion written by Judge Robert Smith. Until a few decades ago, it was an accepted truth for almost everyone who ever lived in any society in which marriage existed that there could be marriage only between participants of different sex. A court should not lightly conclude that everyone who held this belief was irrational, ignorant, or bigoted. We do not so conclude. Our conclusion is that there is a rational basis for limiting marriage to opposite-sex couples. And hence, the New York court, just 4 years ago, determined that there is no basis in the New York State Constitution to force same-sex marriage in the state. So it's interesting to see the different ways that judges look at the Constitution and look at rational thought and beliefs underpinning traditional marriage.
Right.
So we urge the people of New York to continue to remind their lawmakers that, in fact, this is the will of the people.
Rick, we thank you so much for being with us on Currents today. That is all that we have time for, but we'd appreciate your time.
Well, thank you again for having me on the show, and ask me anytime. I'll be happy to be back on.
Thank you so much. Have
Thank
a good
you.
day. And we will be sure to bring you the latest on this story, but stay tuned, there's more Currents straight ahead.
When we return, we'll have the day's headlines, including the latest effort to block a mosque near Ground Zero. Welcome back to Currents. I'm Matt McClure.
And I'm Francesca Maxime. Coming up later, where the Pope goes to relax for the summer.
But first, let's have a look at the day's headlines. Well, tributes continue to pour in for late Yankees owner George Steinbrenner, who died yesterday in Florida at the age of 80. New York Archbishop Timothy Dolan recalled the Yankees' $225,000 donation to Catholic relief services following the earthquake in Haiti. Now, both Dolan and Cardinal Edward Egan took note of Steinbrenner arranging for Yankee Stadium to welcome both Pope John Paul in 1979 and Pope Benedict in 2008. New York City's Landmarks Preservation Commission yesterday heard testimony on whether to grant protected status to a building on the site of a proposed mosque near Ground Zero. The commission expects to vote on that issue in August. Now, meantime, televangelist Bill Keller says he plans to open a Christian center near the site of the proposed mosque. Keller says it would be an ongoing stand against the mosque. The University of Illinois has decided to review the decision to fire a Catholic professor. Dr. Kenneth Howell was reportedly let go for teaching about the church's beliefs on homosexual behavior. A university official says he hopes to have a decision by the start of classes this fall. A source close to the situation says the Church of England is considering a proposal to allow bishops to become nuns. The source tells a British newspaper that the move could make the introduction of women bishops much smoother. Meanwhile, the leader of a group of traditional Anglicans told the Catholic News Service that a large number of people from his church are considering converting to Catholicism.
From France, the lower house of parliament overwhelmingly approved a ban on Islamic veils. Less than 2,000 women in France, out of a total population of 64 million, are believed to wear the veils. The country's Senate is expected to approve the law when it votes in September. Venezuela's bishops are standing firm in the face of harsh criticism from President Hugo Chavez. In a statement, the bishops say that imposing a socialist state inspired by Cuba is absolutely unacceptable. They add that it ignores the popular will and the Constitution. The Vatican announced today that a diocese in China has its first bishop in almost 50 years. The new bishop of Taichung was installed on Saturday. He had spent 5 years in prison and sentenced to forced labor for 25 years. And the Vatican is expected to announce soon new guidelines on how to handle charges of clerical sex abuse. We get some analysis on what those rules might mean from Rome Reports.
The new Vatican rules against sex abuse are a set of processes and sanctions exclusively internal to the Church. The rules are not intended to replace state laws, which the Vatican has ordered to respect as well. Accused priests must undergo two processes, one canonical, or internal to the Church, and another with the state, where laws dictate. The Church will now proceed internally against an accused priest up to 20 years after the victim's 18th birthday. The previous statute of limitations was 10 years after the victim turned 18. The statute for criminal law varies, but the Church can still sanction an accused priest even after the civil period has passed. In severe cases, the accused likely will be expelled from the priesthood. The new norms are an update to the document about offenses against morality and the sacraments, titled De Delictis Gravioribus. The majority of the new norms are converting prior provisions into law. These are not the only changes. Possession of child pornography, abuse of mentally disabled adults, and the recording of confessions using new technologies are all now considered serious offenses. Internal sanctions against accused priests can range from a ban on appearing in public as a priest or celebrating Mass to expulsion from the priesthood in serious cases. The Vatican insists that the penalties for these crimes are internal and will not interfere or replace state sanctions. Another important change now makes the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith responsible for trying cardinals, patriarchs, and bishops.
Stay tuned, there's much more Currents coming up.
Just ahead, a host of one of the net's popular new shows gives us his take on this summer's movies. Welcome back. Well, summer is in full swing, and so is the summer movie season. And if you're still wondering what to see, a little help is on the way. Joining us to give us his spin on this hot season's coolest flicks is Stephen Graydonis, co-host of Real Faith right here on the net, and a film critic for the National Catholic Register. Hi, Steve. Thanks for joining us on Currents.
Francesca, good to be here.
I know last night you saw the movie starring Leonardo DiCaprio called Inception, and it involves his being able to see into people's minds, if I'm correct. Tell us a little bit about that.
Inception is a science fiction action thriller from director Christopher Nolan, who is the creative force behind the most recent Batman movies. And it's really the most eagerly anticipated movie for the summer. Having seen it, I can say it doesn't disappoint. I think that viewers should try to stay as clear from spoilers as possible and go in as cold as you can. But in a nutshell, it's a story about a world in which high-tech identity theft consists not of trying to infiltrate people's computer files, but their subconscious through their dreams. So it's an action thriller, but at the same time, it's got a lot of ideas and emotions on a very grown-up level that it's dealing with, things like guilt and regret, and how healthy ways and unhealthy ways of dealing with all of these. To see a really thoughtful adult science fiction film of this kind is an extremely rare thing. I can't think of the last one that I've seen.
So morally, it can actually sort of tap into our subconscious, if you will, as viewers, and make us think about things that we may not give as much time to as we might need to.
That's absolutely what Chris Nolan wants to do. In fact, one of the big ideas about the movie is that ideas themselves are almost like a virus. An idea is introduced into your mind, and it grows there, and you think about it, and it can change the way that you think and the kind of person that you are. In the movie, this takes an extremely problematic moral form because they're actually trying to convince someone to change his mind about a business decision. So it's a kind of high-tech corporate espionage. But Christopher Nolan, of course, doesn't want to do something like that to you, but he does want you to leave the theater asking big questions about human nature and the nature of faith and doubt and what it means to take a leap of faith. It's really a remarkable achievement.
All right, well, that is a good one for the adults like you and me, but we also have a couple of movies for the kids or for the family, Toy Story 3 and also Despicable Me. Toy Story 3, we've heard of Buzz Lightyear for quite some time now, so we're on our third installment. What's that one about?
The Toy Story franchise is almost the gold standard. It's Pixar's most recognizable brand, and after two extraordinary films, Pixar has now succeeded in bringing the trilogy to a really satisfying conclusion. In Toy Story 2, Woody and Buzz had to face the fact that Andy was going to grow up and go off to college and leave them behind. Toy Story 3 is about that actually happening and how it plays out in the lives of the toys. You'd think that there would be nowhere to go after such a awesome middle film, but the third film actually finds ways of advancing the characters just a little bit more, and in particular bringing Woody's relationship with Andy into really sharp focus at the end. I should mention this is a somewhat darker film than some of the earlier ones, and very sensitive children it might be a little bit too much for, but one of the best family films of the summer for sure.
All right, and we also have Despicable Me, and that involves stealing the moon, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, Despicable Me is one of a trend in recent family films that focus on the villains instead of the heroes. Gru, voiced by Steve Carell, the voice of the mayor from Horton Hears Who, is a mad scientist, evil genius in the vein of Dr. Evil from Austin Powers, but there's no Austin Powers, and he wants to steal the moon in order to prove that he's the greatest supervillain of all time. I'm not going to get into the plot mechanics of why this leads him to the very strange decision of adopting 3 adorable orphans from Miss Hattie's House for Girls. He plans to use them in his scheme, but they wind up having a very humanizing effect on him, and this is where the film winds up being really unexpectedly sweet and sentimental, and much more touching than I was expecting going in.
Well, that was what I was going to say. When you have that humanizing effect on a character that otherwise has this propensity toward evil, what does that teach us in a larger sense morally, and maybe what can it teach our children, and how might we be able to talk to them about that message in the movie?
You don't necessarily expect anybody but Pixar to explore those kinds of moral questions very seriously. What I think we see in Despicable Me particularly is the parent-child relationship in focus. We see that Gru is the villain that he is because all of his life he's wanted his mother's approval, and he's never gotten it. She's voiced by Julie Andrews, which is just a hilarious irony. In his relationship with the 3 children, we see that not only does Gru transcend his own bad parenting in order to become a better parent, but he even learns to accept his mother for who she is and not for who he wishes that she would have been.
Interesting. That's some food for thought there. And there are a couple of other ones out there, including Ramona and Beezus, and we also have The Sorcerer's Apprentice, but we don't really have time to talk much about those. Just a quick thumbs up or thumbs down on those?
I'm going to give thumbs up to both. Sorcerer's Apprentice is not as good as some of Jerry Bruckheimer's earlier films, like Pirates of the Caribbean, but it's still enjoyable fun. And Ramona and Beezus is a squeaky clean and quite sweet adaptation of the beloved Beverly Cleary books.
All right. Well, Steve Graydonis, thanks so much for joining us on Currents. We really appreciate it. Stay right where you are. There's more Currents to come. When we return, it's the town where the Pope spends his summers. We'll take a tour.
Well, finally tonight, how would you like to take a little vacation to Italy? It sounds pretty good about right now. Well, we have your ticket right here.
Tonight, Rome Reports takes us to a corner of Italy rich in history. It is a place that has welcomed popes for centuries, and it's doing it again this year.
Each summer, Benedict XVI leaves Vatican City to intensely study and pray in the outskirts of Rome. His destination this year is Castel Gandolfo, a town 25 miles southeast of Rome with a population of about 8,000 people. The town has 136 acres. That's 27 acres more than Vatican City. The property includes the Papal Palace, 2 convents, 1 school, farms, gardens, and the Vatican Observatory. The first pope to use Castel Gandolfo as a summer residence was Urban VIII Barberini. As a cardinal, he already enjoyed spending the summer months at Castel Gandolfo and first went there as pope in the spring of 1626. With the Lateran Treaty of 1929, Italy recognized the full ownership by the Holy See of the Pontifical Palace of Castel Gandolfo. In 1934, the observatory was moved from the Vatican to Castel Gandolfo because of the urban growth. There was too much glare in Rome's sky to such an extent that fainter stars could no longer be studied. During the Second World War, the Vatican was a neutral country and Pope Pius XII opened the gates of Castel Gandolfo. About 12,000 Jews sought refuge there and remained in the pontifical town until the liberation of Rome on June 4, 1944. During that time, the papal apartment was reserved for mothers to give birth to their babies, and at least 40 babies were born there. In 1959, Pope John XXIII inaugurated two traditions at Castel Gandolfo: the recitation of the Angelus on Sunday mornings in the palace courtyard, and Mass in the parish to mark the Feast of the Assumption. Pope Benedict XVI spent his first summer there in 2005. This will be his 5th summer in one of the most beautiful towns in Italy. His brother Georg will also accompany him to Castel Gandolfo.
I'll tell you what, I'd like to take a trip over to Castel Gandolfo myself.
Seriously, it's so gorgeous. And such a rich history, too. I mean, I had no idea. You talk about Castel Gandolfo every year, and you're like, okay, this is where the Pope is vacationing. But to really kind of know and see the history behind it.
Back to the 1600s.
Yeah, it's really cool. It's very nice.
I just know that, you know, a little town of 8,000 in the mountains in the southeast of the Rome area. Yeah, I'll go there.
The basics, right, exactly. Speaking of vacations, by the way, it's a great time to take one to New York. My family's here, as you know.
This is true.
High in the control room.
Had a chance to meet them. Welcome from Georgia.
Well, that's it for tonight, everybody. Now, coming up tomorrow, postal rates are about to take a licking. And we'll see if they'll keep on ticking, I guess. How will an expected increase affect the church? We'll find out about that and much more coming up tomorrow.
Until then, you can always catch us online. Just go to currentsny.net, and if you have an idea for a story, or if you just want to get in touch with us or people behind the scenes, you can always drop us a line at currentsny@currentsny.net. That is the email address. Until next time, I'm Francesca Maxime.
And I'm Matt McClure. Thanks so much for joining us. Have a great night.